Council on Climate Solutions meeting. We'll get started here in just a minute. I'm going to let a few more folks log in so that we are getting close to full strength. Great to see so many smiling faces. I gotta say, when you do this regularly like this, you start to get used to it. It's nice to see everybody. Look forward to even maybe being in person one of these days soon. What do we think? August, September, maybe? All right, we'll go ahead and get started because we have so much to do as usual. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Clark, Director of Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. I'm very pleased that you've joined us for the Council on Climate Solutions for Michigan. This is our fifth meeting. We're doing these the fourth Tuesday of the month. We're thrilled to get going again here today. We have a tendency to have lots to pack into the calendar. So appreciate everybody's promptness and the ability to get through all the content that we've got. So excited for the agenda that we've got in front of us today. For the next meeting coming up, oops, echoing. We'll give it a second. It usually settles out. Okay, if everybody can mute, that'd be great. Nobody wants to echo. Our next meeting in July, we're going to be focused on energy intensive industries. And so one of the things I wanted to share up front, and I'll mention this again at the end for council members, is that as you all are aware, we've been trying to get a lot of work done in our allotted time and are feeling like we could use a little bit more time. So if there is not an objection, I'm going to propose that we add 30 minutes to the agenda for the July meeting and actually go for 2 hours. And you all know how I feel about that, which is negative. But I want to make sure that we have enough time to have the conversations that we need to have. So folks should let me know if they've got concerns with that. Otherwise, that's the plan for the next meeting in July. So we'll go from 3 till 5. We won't start earlier. We'll just go an extra half hour. So I'm going to just take a break and see if any of the council members have concerns with that they want to raise. Great. Well, I continue to be grateful for the amount of time and energy that you're putting into not only the council meetings, but also the work group meetings and deliberations that are happening there. So I thank all of you for giving up an extra 30 minutes of your time for that next conversation as well. And then the August council meeting, we're hoping to perhaps be at a point where we're ready to start working through some recommendations coming out of the work groups. And we also have been working through a couple of different directions for conversations on equity, which I know has been connected into the work group conversations as well as the regular council meetings, but we were thinking it might be useful to have a separate session just there as well. So we'll get more to you on that for the August meeting. So I'm going to start by going through and doing a roll call, and then we'll do some council business and then get to our presentations. So I'm going to run through the council members real quick. And I'll loop back to folks if I don't have a chance to hear you when I go through the first time. So I'm going to start at the top of the list, alphabetical. Ron Vogelweed, you're going to wait till the end. So we're going to start with Paul Adjaba. Paul, are you with us, or Niles from MDOT? All right.
Yes, I am.
Oh, great.
How are you today?
I'm
Good
doing
afternoon,
great.
everybody.
Nice to see you, sir. Sorry to go so quickly to get you off that mute button.
Oh, that's fine. Again, I think the committee is doing some great work. One of the things we've been working on, Director Clark, we have a core team that's been looking at how do we begin to address the evolution of EVs coming in the very near future. And this core group that's state agency group has been working on that. We have a study going on right now, but MSU is conducting a statewide study. This study started before Ford obviously announced that they are speeding up their production, and also before the Biden administration decided EV is going to be part of the infrastructure package. So what we've since then done is decided we're going to expand that study, add some more money to MSU's contract, expand the scope of that study to make it a statewide study. So you'll be hearing more about that study in the near future. I think frankly, once we get MSU to expand that study, it should be part of our regular update to this group so they know what's going on till we get the final result. So I just kind of want to mention that as a summary of what we're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I am excited about the expansion of that MSU study around where we place EV infrastructure. So a very nice nexus with the work at the council. Thank you. So let's work through the list and see who we've got on for council members. Frank Beaver, are you with us?
I am here. Thank you again for another invitation, chance to sit on the council this afternoon. Thank you.
Great. Nice to see you. From MEDC, I'm excited. I had a chance to talk to our new MEDC lead last night, and he'll be joining us soon, but he's not on the job yet. So look forward to Quentin joining us for the July meeting. I'm hoping we'll get on his calendar as quick as we can. So just as an FYI there. In his absence, we may have Steve Bacall with us. Steve, are you here?
I am here.
Great to have you, Steve.
Great.
Susan Corbin.
Hi, Director Clark. This is Judd Herzer on behalf of Susan Corbin.
Hi, Judd. Glad you're here. Thank you. Mary Draves.
I'm here.
Great.
Hello.
Thanks, Mary. Carrie Dugan.
Present.
Hi, Carrie. Dan Eichinger. Dan, I think I see you.
Afternoon, Director. Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if we have anybody from Treasury.
Yeah, Larry Steckelberg, Treasury.
Oh, great. Thanks, Larry. Jim Harrison. I think I see you.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm here. Good to see everybody. Thanks.
See, we're getting used to each other, right? Elizabeth Hertel from DHHS, or maybe Megan Groen.
Megan's here.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Brandon Hoffmeister.
I'm here.
I like how I look around my screen. Where's Brandon? Brandon was over here, then he's over there. Okay. Marnice Jackson.
Hi, I'm here.
Marnice too. Great. Thanks for being here. I know, I feel like I need to wave when I see people on the screen. So, Director McDowell from Department of Ag and Rural Development.
I'm here, Lisa.
Great.
Hector.
Hey, Gary. Okay. Dr. Phyllis Meadows from Kresge.
I'm here and I'm waving at you.
Great. Thank you. And Dr. Overpack, who is also right on my screen. Okay.
That's here.
Nice to see you, sir. Tanya Pozlowski also, wait, I lost Tanya. Tanya was here a minute ago. Where are you, Tanya?
Here.
Okay. Let's see. Cynthia Williams. I don't think I've seen Cynthia's
I'm
face.
here.
There she is. Great. Thanks, Cynthia. Phil Roos.
I'm here. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Phil. Dan Scripps.
I'm here.
Here he is. Jarrell Slaughter.
Hello. Here.
Hello, Jarrell. Sam Stolper.
Hi, Director Clark. Hi, everybody.
Great. Thanks for being here. And down to the end, Ron Vogelweed. Ben, Ron, we're just going to bump you up to the top. Next time, we're going to go backwards. Is Ron with us? Okay, great. Anybody who joined us after we did roll call? I think we have basically everybody. So I guess I'll just say again, thank you for your time and commitment to this really important effort. I know it is, you make important decisions about your time, and we're grateful that you're choosing to be here and to spend this time. Okay, next I'd like to put the agenda in front of us. So let's put the agenda in front of us and then we'll talk through it. So do I have a motion to put the agenda in front of us?
So moved.
Thanks, Darrell.
Support.
Thanks, Dan. So discussion on the agenda. So again, today's natural and working lands. We've got a presentation from Mitch Hunter from the American Farmland Trust, and then a presentation from Haley Leslie Bowl from World Resources Institute. We're going to follow our usual pattern and have some open discussion after that. And then we'll spend a couple of minutes at the end talking about where the work groups are at and sharing that so that information is socialized amongst the council members. So do I have, let's see, all in favor? Let me say, any other discussion on the agenda before I take a vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Thank you. Next, I'd like to make sure we've approved the May minutes. So you should have received that in an email on June 18th. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. So let's first move it and then we can have discussion on any improvements necessary. Do I have a motion to put the minutes in front of us?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Great, heard a couple. So we'll call one movement and then we'll call the other support. So any discussion on the May meeting minutes? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, thanks. All right, so we are going to move into the conversation for today on natural and working lands. And I've just got a couple of slides up front to start it, and then I'm going to hand it over to our work group co-chairs to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our speakers. Oh, thank you. You guys are wonderful. So just to put a couple of statistics in front of us, because I like to have us grounded in the data. Let's see. Okay, so I know this is tiny. I'm sorry. You've seen this a couple of times though, so hopefully it's familiar to you. I wanted to ground us in greenhouse gas emissions. So as you all know, we've spent some time on electricity specifically. We've spent some time on mobility. Next month, we're going to spend time on industry. So here we're talking through, and we've done buildings as well, but here we're talking through natural and working lands. And so I wanted to give you just kind of a grounding in what percentage of emissions it is that we're talking about. And of course, our presenters are going to do a much deeper and better job than I can. Hopefully you've had a chance to spend a little time with the pre-reads as well. So this is a percentage as it breaks down from US EPA, so nationally. And of course, when we look at Michigan, it looks like a little bit of a different profile, but generally fits what we've seen at the US level. I put this slide in. This is one of the slides that was used in the presentations that were given to the work group. And I just really liked this slide because I felt like it was a good representation of how the pieces fit together. I felt like it had sort of a systemic look as well as complexity and the interconnectedness. But I stole this from one of the slides that was in front of the Natural Working Lands Work Group that Scott and Lauren run. And so I liked it because it feels like it kind of captured all the different paths when we talk about natural and working lands. And I felt like in one picture, it helped me understand the movement as well as the magnitude because of the way the numbers are represented here. And so, striking the balance, as the different sources intersect when we're talking about what sort of impact it has on our atmosphere. And so I just wanted to set it up from a grounding perspective. But again, our presenters are going to do way better than I can, particularly on this topic. So I would like to hand it over to, let's go to Scott Whitcomb first. Oh, we've got Lauren listed first I'm going to go to Lauren first because she's listed first on the slide. So I'd love for Lauren Cooper to introduce herself from Michigan State University as one of our working group chairs. We're so grateful for her time on this project. So Lauren, if you could say hello, that'd be wonderful.
Everybody, good to see you. I hope I'm coming in clear. I'm having some spotty internet today, but really great to be here today. And it's been a pleasure working with Scott on our working group so far.
Another 5-6 years.
Great, thank you, Lauren. We're really appreciative of your time. And then Scott Whitcomb from DNR.
Yeah, hi folks. Happy to be here. It's been a lot of fun. We've got, as you'll find out today, we have a really broad sector. Intersects a lot with land use, all the way from agriculture to urban forestry to working forests. So really a broad sector, and it's been a lot of fun to work on.
Great, appreciate that, Scott. And I am really grateful for the support of the working group co-chairs. There's been a lot of work that's happening in the work groups, and this is an example of another two set of individuals that are really putting a lot of time in for us, which we greatly appreciate. So with that, I am going to hand it over to our first presenter today. We're really excited to just jump right into it. So Mitch Hunter from American Farmland Trust. Mitch, you come with very high regards. We're really excited to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to open it up and give you the floor.
All right. Thank you so much, Liesl. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm just going to get my my slides going, and that should be coming through in just a second here. So let me know if there's any issues with the slides or with my audio. But yeah, really excited to be here. I'm the research director from American Farmland Trust. Background in agronomy, so on-farm management and research focused on climate mitigation and adaptation. And just want to give you a little bit of intro to who AFT is. We were founded in 1980. And while we are the only agricultural land trust with a national scope, we're also a leading nonprofit organization working at the intersection of agriculture and the environment. And our mission is to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. I also lead our climate work, which centers on quantifying and analyzing the impacts of programs and policies, engaging and educating stakeholders and decision makers like yourself, and informing and driving new policies. And these approaches are applied to the three key strategies that we use to make progress on climate. The first one is most relevant to what we're talking about today, which is to accelerate the adoption of regenerative agricultural practices. Enough said for now. I'll be getting into the details in a minute. Second, we also work to protect farmland and promote compact growth. So for all of you thinking about this, I think trying to get your heads around land use, not just what is done on the land, but broadly speaking, do we use the land? Do we keep it in a natural state with a forest or a farm? Or is it ultimately converted to development, and especially sprawling development, which comes with a host of implications for greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and heating and cooling and a wide variety of other sources, as well as major impacts on other areas of the environment, including biodiversity. So compact growth and protecting farmland is an important piece of the whole. And we're also working on expanding smart solar siting. Similar thought process. We want to put solar where it makes sense, especially on brownfields and industrial sites and roofs and parking lots where there's not a trade-off. And then when we do put solar on natural and working lands, we want to do that in a way that maintains the most important values that those lands provide, including food production. Okay, there's a little mini introduction. I'll also give an overview of greenhouse gas emissions from Michigan agriculture. This is based on EPA data originally, although the World Resources Institute nicely curated for us on a state basis, and it includes both animal production and crop production. Our results show that the majority of the emissions are from agricultural soil management. So you can think of this as almost entirely nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer applications. I don't want the takeaway to be that all farmers are out there over fertilizing. That's not the whole story. Anytime that you grow crops, even with the most judicious use of fertilizer, you will produce some nitrous oxide emissions. That said, nitrogen management is still a critical tool, and there are ways to reduce that fertilizer application and make it less susceptible to losses as nitrous oxide. The next most in terms of total emissions is from enteric fermentation, essentially methane burps, methane from cow burps, that is. And a similar amount of emissions come from manure management, which is in the form roughly equally of both methane and nitrous oxide. So in the state in 2018, total emissions from agriculture were about 11.7 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent, which came out to about 6.8% of total state emissions, which is slightly lower than the national average. And one thing I want to mention is that this inventory does not account for changes in soil stocks. And when you hear discussions of climate and agriculture, the vast majority of the conversation centers around soil carbon and our ability to sequester more carbon in the soil. And that's most of what I'll be talking about today as well. It's very, very important, but it's still important to have a broader view of the whole system and recognize that it's not really a one-to-one equivalency if you continue to release nitrous oxide and methane even if you're sequestering quite a bit of carbon to go along with it, we need a system-wide approach that's addressing all of those flows of greenhouse gases. The other side of the coin is that this inventory also does not account for the benefits of conservation practices that are already adopted. So the methodology is based on kind of a baseline management assumption, when in fact a large number of farmers in Michigan and across the country are using better practices that do have a positive income on their net greenhouse gas emissions, and that's not accounted for at this point. So some context. And we at AFT believe that it's really important to make progress to start to bring those greenhouse gas emissions down, ultimately drive towards carbon neutrality. And as part of our work on this, we've partnered with the U.S. Climate Alliance, which of course Michigan is a member of. We've created a tool and done a lot of analysis to assess the CO2 equivalent reduction impact of both existing and new conservation practices. And this work was all done with the CARPE tool. CARPE stands for Carbon Reduction Potential Evaluation. This tool brings together two major data sets for the first time. The first is the Census of Agriculture, which has information on what farmers are out there doing. So how many acres are there in cropland and grazing land, and what practices are being adopted or have been adopted. And second, the COMET Planner tool, which is a USDA tool that can estimate greenhouse gas reductions from agricultural conservation practices. So when we bring those together in CARPE, we have the ability to estimate potential greenhouse gas mitigation for different agricultural lands using different practice adoption scenarios. And we're able to visualize the data because we have acreage and practice adoption at the state, county, state, regional, and national levels. So that's really helpful for planning. And finally, we have a number of summary reports and tables that can make this information more usable to decision makers. The CARPE tool is freely available online. You're welcome to use it. We'd love to have you use it, and the URL will be up at the end of this presentation. Quickly, I just need to acknowledge the leadership of Dr. Jen Moore and Dr. Dan Manter, especially as the two main developers of this tool, along with Tabitha Brown and Shelby McClelland. And within the context of this tool, we're able to evaluate a good number of conservation practices. For today, I'm going to be focusing on really just the 6 soil health practices, or 6 of the soil health practices, with an emphasis on cover cropping and no tillage or strip tillage. And that's because we have good data on the adoption of those practices from the Census of Agriculture, and the modeling behind them is more robust. This is a very technical slide. I'm not going to go into it. And just in the interest of time, my point is that for each of these different conservation practices, what this COMET Planner tool allows us to do is estimate per acre per year, when you adopt that practice, what's the impact on soil carbon? Is soil carbon sequestration leading to a net reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide? And also, what is any countervailing effect or synergistic effect on nitrous oxide emissions? For instance, legume cover crops can result in higher nitrous oxide emissions, even though on net, with the soil carbon benefits, they can be positive. So we are taking from COMET Planner these total emissions reduction coefficients. And then we use those by combining them with acreage of adoption to get to reduction potential. And what I'm showing here is the theoretical maximum, the absolute top reduction potential that we're able to get in the state of Michigan from cover cropping and from conservation tillage. It's broken out into what we've already achieved based on currently adopted practices, as well as what might be remaining. So for cover crops, with the acreage already in cover crops, there's about 100,000 metric tons of CO2 per year that are being sequestered, and with 100% adoption across all of the available acres in Michigan, that would get up to over 1 million. Likewise, with conservation tillage, it's about 1.3 million currently. If it was 100% adoption of no tillage, that would get to about 3.5 million. And the total of those 4.6 million tons of CO2 reduction is equivalent to about 39% of Michigan agriculture's total emissions. And while it's probably not realistic to reach 100% adoption of these practices, the fact that just 2 practices have the potential to mitigate nearly 40% of the whole sector's greenhouse gas emissions shows that there is a lot of potential, that agriculture is a sector that can provide benefits that can be part of the solution and that warrants energy and attention. Just a quick plug, this is looking at 100% cover crop adoption in Michigan. And my point here is just that the spatial component of CARPE is pretty helpful and useful for targeting state level efforts. You wouldn't focus in the UP, that's not going to be news to any of you, but this can be helpful to determine which counties are the most important to focus on as far as increasing adoption of these practices. I'll now go through briefly a more realistic scenario. Like I said, 100% adoption is not super realistic. So in this scenario, we looked at the 5.5 million acres that were in row crops in 2017. We calculated what would happen if we implemented cover crops on 25% of the acres. Conservation crop rotation, which is essentially incorporating perennial crops into an annual crop rotation. We did that on 20% of the acres. And we went to no-till on 50% of the total acres. And what we saw from this scenario is that overall, those three practices and a realistic adoption could result in a net greenhouse gas reduction of 1.8 million metric tons. That's alone can cover about 15% of total agricultural emissions in the state of Michigan. And Michigan can harness this potential today by working with farmers to promote voluntary adoption of these practices. They're very scalable, they're very shovel ready, so to speak. And there are tons of benefits from each of these that I haven't gotten to address, but benefits for water, for wildlife, for farm viability, etc. Few closing thoughts. Again, conservation practices on farms are a key tool in the climate toolbox, and our CARPE tool can help state decision makers prioritize these efforts. It's also critical to address the pieces that I mentioned at the beginning, but that CARPE doesn't directly address, or at least our analysis hasn't very directly addressed, related to nutrient management, which by the way can also save farmers money and benefit water quality, and enteric fermentation and manure management. And finally, again, I just want to hammer home that the co-benefits from these practices are great, really beneficial for farmers, for rural communities, and for the environment broadly. So with that, thanks for the opportunity to present. I look forward to any questions, and we would love to help you think about strategies and policy tools to capture the potential that agriculture can provide. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Mitch. I'm gonna ask folks to, let's have the next presentation on forestry from Haley Leslie Bowl, and then we'll take some discussion and questions at the end, if that's okay with you, Mitch. You'll be on for a minute.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay, so next I'd like to move over to World Resources Institute. And Haley, the floor is yours. We're glad to have you.
Thanks, everyone. Just give me 1 second. All right, is everybody seeing a presenter view here?
We're seeing your, you can, yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, so glad to be here today. Thank you so much, Director Clark and the rest of the council for having me. So World Resources Institute, we have sort of a global scale, but my scope of work is I lead natural and working lands climate solutions for the US specifically. And one of the core parts of my portfolio is working with the US Climate Alliance to advance strategies around natural and working lands, and particularly around the role that data and inventories can play. So as an extension of this Climate Alliance work, I've been working with Scott and Lauren a lot. So for the greater part of the past year, it's been really great getting to know Michigan, and I'm really excited to be here today to participate in the discussion around the ways that Michigan can continue to harness the potential of natural and working lands to reach climate goals. So today specifically, I'm going to be giving sort of a one-on-one on carbon removal opportunities for natural and working lands and how they can contribute to a net zero future. So Michigan, as well as a number of other states and the federal government, has set net zero targets by mid-century. And I want to start by looking at the role that natural working lands can play in reaching that goal. So this infographic is an overly simplistic representation of the pathways to net zero. And this kind of holds whether you're looking at a state or federal scale. And obviously the first imperative here is to be reducing emissions as ambitiously and quickly as we can. But even with those emissions reductions measure, there's likely to be some emissions that are going to be very difficult to abate and remain in the economy by mid-century. And so to reach net zero, we're going to more than likely need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And carbon removal can sort of happen in two ways. Firstly, it can happen through natural solutions, which I'm going to be focusing mostly on today, as well as through emerging technological solutions like you may have heard of direct air capture. So you may notice, like I said, that throughout the presentation, I may be mentioning or some of the figures have these technological options because at WRI, we generally look at what role natural working lands can play in carbon removal as part of a broader portfolio of carbon removal opportunities to get to net zero. So in 2020, WRI released a working paper called Carbon Shot that looked at net zero futures for the US and looked at carbon removal pathways to help us get there. And here you see a donut chart where we estimate the quantities of CO2 that different pathways could remove from the atmosphere now through 2050, sorry. And this is for the entire US, just to be clear. And the main takeaways here are that natural and working lands are critical to reach national climate goals. And natural and working lands represent about half of the carbon removal opportunity at the national scale. And then the rest would likely have to come from technological options. So now I'll move into unpacking specific pathways. So our last donut chart looked at cumulative totals, and then this chart looks at annual carbon removal potential. So how much could each technology remove from the atmosphere per year by 2050? This is a bit of a technical chart, so I'll just walk you through it quickly. The dark bars represent a range of plausible levels of deployment, and then the lighter bars represent the upper bounds of potential. So sort of a technical potential given some safeguards, such as ensuring that natural climate solutions don't compromise our ability to produce food. And I just want to draw your attention to the solutions that are relevant to natural and working lands. So tree restoration and agricultural soils in the middle of the chart. These are sort of our largest and most plausibly impactful potential opportunities for natural carbon removal. And of those, I'm going to be focusing mostly on trees today because Mitch just covered agriculture so beautifully. And you'll see over on the right that there are some other pathways which...
I'm going to stop you for a second. I think somebody took over the screen. Can others not see Haley's slides anymore, or is it just me?
Nope, I'm in the same boat.
No, I can't see them either.
Okay.
One
second. Let's see if we can. Mike Uza, it looks like you've. Okay, ooh, we've got the power back. All right, Haley, power's back to you. Sorry to interrupt you. If you could put your slides back up, that'd be great.
Thought we were going to get Teams bombed. I was excited.
Dan,
are we all good?
we need you to put your slides back up.
Oh, I see.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much.
No, that's fine.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think I left off by just saying that there are a couple other pathways on the right side of this figure that I'm not really going to go into because time is limited, but I can take questions on those later. Hello. All right, my slides are now not advancing. Okay, So I'm going to dive in here on tree restoration. Our research through Carbon Shot has found that nationally there's an opportunity to restore trees to the landscape plausibly on the scale of about 40 billion trees across the US, which is about a 12% increase in over current levels of tree cover. And when we think about restoring trees on the landscape, I think a lot of us think first of reforestation, which is the first green bar on the right. And this involves planting trees or encouraging natural regeneration on land that was historically forested but has lost its forest cover due to harvesting or due to land use change. But that's not the only way to restore trees to the landscape. We actually found that the biggest carbon removal option was from restocking existing forests that have been degraded by disease or by harvesting. And though we didn't necessarily include this in the carbon portion of this analysis, but I want to underscore that for both reforestation and restocking, we need to take into account the long-term health and ecological resilience of forests in the face of climate change, as well as managing them just for carbon sequestration. So this could include selecting climate resilient tree species for planting and creating long-term forest management plans. And we also look here at opportunities to establish trees outside of forests. So this includes agroforestry through incorporating trees into animal livestock or croplands without reducing yield and with adding co-benefits. And we look at urban reforestation, which has a relatively small carbon impact, but I think as we well know, there are a lot of environmental and human health co-benefits around urban reforestation as well. And just really quickly, we looked at federal policy needs that, these type of policies could be relevant to Michigan as well, that we found the biggest opportunity was on private lands. And so the policy need here really is economic incentives for landowners to plant and grow more trees on their land. And nationally, we found that the need here is on the scale of about $4 billion per year. So that's the basic of restoring trees to the landscape. I'm going to just go over this agricultural slide super quickly because Mitch went into a lot more detail on a lot of this, but just wanted to flag that agricultural soils, as Mitch was saying, do present a big opportunity for carbon removal. And we found that if 2/3 of grazing land and agricultural lands nationally were to adopt some kind of soil carbon enhancing practices, we could potentially, this is an ideal world scenario, remove 200 million tons of CO2 by 2050. And this would require about a $500 million a year investment in supporting farmers in implementing these. So that kind of completes a simplified tour of the biggest natural and working lands pathways for carbon removal, but there are other ways to manage natural and working lands for climate benefits. So I wanted to just draw your attention to a few other strategies that we've not researched super extensively, but they're really important to highlight. And the first one is avoiding conversion of natural landscapes to land types that store less carbon. So conversion from forests and grasslands to either croplands or settlements. And this is an interesting graphic from a 2017 study that looks at rates of land conversion and maps them against the locations of ethanol refineries. So you can see that a lot of land use change in this study was correlated fairly directly to the presence of bioenergy. So that's something interesting to think about. And then, and a little bit later, I'm going to dive into Michigan specific opportunities, and we'll see in the vein of land conversion that avoiding grassland conversion to cropland is a big opportunity for Michigan. And then another opportunity that's potentially important for Michigan is conservation and restoration of terrestrial wetlands, which includes things like peatlands. And wetlands can actually be a source or a sink of greenhouse gases. When they're drained, they release CO2 and methane, but intact wetlands can sequester carbon by accumulating organic matter. And at the national scale and probably the state scale, wetlands represent a fairly small opportunity for carbon sequestration just because the area of wetlands is so small. But that doesn't mean that there's not a pretty big bang for your buck in terms of conserving and restoring wetlands, both from the carbon perspective, and we know that there are a lot of co-benefits in terms of wildlife habitat and flood mitigation and other things like that. So that was a super high-speed tour of carbon removal pathways at a national level. And so I want to here zoom in on opportunities for Michigan specifically. So we'll start by looking at the role that Michigan's forests are already playing as carbon sinks. And I focused just here on forests because we have the most robust inventory data for forests. The data is a little bit limited for other sectors, and Mitch did a great job covering the agricultural sector again. So in this figure, so this is taken from 2019 U.S. Forest Service data, which is the most sort of most up-to-date federal data that we have. And starting on the right, you see that in 2019, Michigan's existing forests outside of settlements removed about 14.4 million tons of CO2. Urban trees removed another close to 4 million tons. And then when we get over to the columns on the right, we see some land use change. So we see that in 2019, in terms of carbon, forest gain and forest loss just about balanced each other out. So the question then becomes, what are the largest opportunities to increase carbon stored in natural working lands? And so we pulled some data from an analysis we did back in 2019. WRI worked with the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Climate Alliance to conduct an opportunity assessment of climate pathways by state. And from this project, we found that top opportunities for Michigan include restocking and understocked forests, reforestation, and silvopasture, each with a bit more than 3 million tons of removal potential annually. And then to go into a little more detail, this chart shows the quantification of different pathways. You can see that the tree-based pathways at the top of the chart have the largest opportunities, with other important but slightly less impactful pathways just in terms of carbon outlined there below. So this should not be taken as a holy grail. This just gives us a sense of general scale of the opportunities, but we need quite a bit more research to really pin down what those opportunities are. Which sort of leads me to the last thing that I want to touch on, which is the importance of inventories in this effort. So now that we've seen the general potential for these various pathways, the question becomes, where are we starting from? What is the baseline level for all these pathways, and how can we track change? Because the truth is that we can't really manage what we don't measure. So greenhouse gas inventories are really important for setting those baselines and tracking changes over time. And then inventories also help inform targets and goal setting. So if we have this target of reaching net zero, we need to be able to establish how much carbon removal we can expect to come from natural working lands. And at WRI, we've identified a few things that can make inventories particularly challenging in the NWL space. So unlike in the energy sector, there's a lot of variability across the landscape. And also our understanding of how management practices impact greenhouse gas fluxes is still definitely evolving. So this makes natural working land inventories potentially more challenging than those in other sectors. We do have federal data sets and tools that can definitely help states with inventories, but all these tools have some caveats and shortcomings to think about. The EPA publishes a national greenhouse gas inventory, which I'm sure many of you know about annually, and they're in the process currently of disaggregating the national inventory data at the state level. But there are still gaps within the national inventory and the state inventory tool. So for example, carbon sequestered in croplands and grasslands are shown as the same land use type in the state inventory tool. So there's a lot of opacity about what's happening in each of these pools, and wetlands are excluded entirely. And I also just want to really underline that across all these pathways, uncertainty is quite high, and these are based on models that may have compounding errors. And for some areas, you get very high uncertainty intervals. So this leads us basically to the fact that we have a lot of opportunities at the state and federal level, opportunities to integrate LiDAR and remote sensing methods to monitor forest composition, canopy cover, but also to look at ag management practices and also wetlands monitoring. And then anything that you, the state, can do to hone emissions factors to state-specific environments will really help to improve the accuracy of the inventories. So to conclude, as we're thinking about ways to increase carbon removal in the land sector, we need to also be thinking about improving data collection and monitoring capabilities to make sure we can track progress in these actions. And thank you so much, and feel free to throw questions at me during the Q&A or follow up over email.
Great, thank you so much, Haley. I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion points. I think at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Doug Scott. Doug is going to take us through some moderated discussion. I guess before I hand it to Doug, though, I just want to remind folks, too, that we're really appreciative of having lots of people joining us in this conversation. I'm going to ask our questions and discussion to come from council members. We'll have more opportunity for public comment. Certainly, we'll have some future sessions for that. And then, I know there's lots of feedback in the work group meetings, but this discussion is for council members. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug.
Great. Thanks, Director. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you again. Looking forward to some good discussion here in the next few minutes. Thanks also to Mitch and Haley for really teeing up the subject extremely well. So as we always do, I'm gonna pick out a few people to hear from first, and we're gonna get some of their perspectives. And then for the other council members who have either a question of Mitch or Haley, or a point that they'd like to make about what their priority is or what they'd like to see with respect to natural working lands and forest products, just go ahead and hit the raise your hand feature, and I've got the participant list up, so I will see when you raise your hand, and I will get to you in the order that I see them. But first, let me call on a couple of people just to make some comments or give some perspectives. First, I'd like to call on Director Eichinger from DNR. Director, I thought I saw you with that great background on here a little while ago, so if you want to give some perspective here.
Sure. Thanks for that, and thanks to the two great presentations that we had today. It's interesting. I think when we had our kickoff meeting for the council, one of the things that I talked about was the side of the equation, the side of the climate equation that an agency like the Department of Natural Resources can work on. And there's sort of the additive side, and then there's sort of the, I don't know if subtractive is a word, but sort of the subtraction side of that equation. And and particularly as it relates to things like, carbon sequestration, carbon storage potential, because we, in our department, we come at this from the perspective of being the, essentially the single largest landowner in the state of Michigan. And of that, 4.5 million acres that the Department of Natural Resources manages, 3.9 million acres are represented in our state forest system, the largest state forest system in the country outside of the state of Alaska. And in addition to that, we own and manage, several 100,000 acres of grasslands and things like that. So we talk about, what our management approaches can be, is we manage that state forest system for a variety of values for, timber production potential that's there, forest, the timber and forest products industry in the state of Michigan, hugely significant from an economic standpoint. Obviously the wildlife and environmental quality benefits that are supported by our state forest system. And then you layer on top of that the potential for our state forest system to represent, a really important component of what our climate mitigation strategies are. It puts us at this really interesting intersection, and it gives us a really, I think, cool opportunity in our agency to, beta test some of the strategies that we're talking about here, because we are you know, if part of what we're looking for, and I think I heard some of this in Haley's presentation, you know, part of what we're looking for is to do some proof of concept on what some of our management strategies and management techniques should be for our sort of that cadence of forest management, whether it's what our harvest rotation schedules are, what kinds of species make up that, you know, the composition of our state forest system. And, you know, we heard about, you know, susceptibility of, you know, native Michigan tree species to things like invasive forest pests and the negative effects of climate change. That's already happening. We're already observing those things. You know, if we're losing vigor in our native, you know, in our native forest stands, what does that mean for our long-term potential to use them as part of our climate mitigation strategy? So there's so much that's nested here, but I think we're really kind of at this interesting place where, because we own, you know, we own the dirt, and to some extent we've got the ability to influence what that management looks like. We have an opportunity, I think, to really run to ground and do some live beta testing on these strategies so that we can start to populate the data sets that are kind of theoretical at this point, or that we've modeled, and ground truth that here in the state of Michigan, and start to really put, you know, some additional flavor and color and dimension behind, you know, some of these, you know, really kind of exciting but nascent and sort of conceptual ideas about what these land systems can do for us on the climate side of the house. So it's just really fascinating. It's the kind of thing that, you know, once I got into this role, I'm thinking about the potential of the land base that we have here and how that can fit into what our climate solution strategies are. But that's the kind of stuff that, you know, you talk about, like sweaty palms moments in your career, and that's like one of those. This is one of those things, right, where we really have an opportunity, I think, to do something pretty cool here. So good stuff. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Doug.
Hey, thanks, Director. That's really exciting, really helpful as well. Let me next call on Director McDowell from Ag and Rural Development. Director.
Well, thank you so much, Doug, and thank you, Director Clark, for all your hard work on this very important issue, and also the governor for setting this council up and putting you in charge of it. Shows your leadership right there. But from the ag perspective, we've a lot of times, I think the ag community has had a lot of fingers pointed at it as being a major source of pollutants and climate change, carbon. And we look at there's two ways we can address that. You know, we can eliminate or help reduce the emissions that are created when you are doing your farm practices, but also we can help mitigate climate change, like with Mitch, with his presentation, with carbon sequestration and using these better practices, these best practices, we can really be an important sector to actually reduce climate change and help get us on track for our zero emissions. At this time with the department, we don't actually have any farmland, so we have to work with the farmers to help them adapt to these better practices. We do have a program in place. It's a voluntary program called MEAP, is Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assessment Program, and it's actually coming up to be reauthorization at the end of this year, which we are presently working on. And we see this as a real important tool for this, and especially at this time with the Biden administration and Secretary Vilsack, when they start talking about all the incentives they're going to have for farmers. Because we look at a farmer, they're a small business, and we can talk about the benefits of changing these better practices, but they take a little bit of time, and most farmers are, so my payment's coming up next month. So with these incentives, and also coming from the Biden administration, working through our department with this program, we just see a great opportunity here to really step our game up. So with the reauthorization, we're looking at probably changing our focus, hopefully, instead of just on a number of verifications, but actually looking at outputs, results, focusing more on the farm fields that are having the most loading coming off of them, instead of just a broad plan across the whole state. Focusing more on water quality, monitoring it, making sure we can show we are getting results from focusing on just maybe a much smaller number of parcels, but actually making a difference there. So that's probably in a nutshell what we're really looking at this time. But we just see a lot of great opportunities out there really to make an impact. And working closely with Dan and Liesel. Our 3 agencies were called the Quality of Life Agencies. And we had a conversation earlier today about what we can do together, the 3 of us, and actually start showcasing some of the successes that we have had in the state.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Director. We appreciate those remarks. We've got a couple other folks teed up. I'm going to turn first to Frank Beaver and then to Phil Roos. So, Frank, want to give us some of your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I sure can. First off, I'd like to preface the thoughts with, yep, I'm a tribal government employee as well as a tribal citizen with the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa Chippewa Indians. But I don't represent any particular tribes or even the tribal government that I happen to work for. So I'd encourage those of us who want, some sort of formal or even informal discussions with your tribes to approach those folks, right, directly. But I am absolutely happy to offer my perspective from working with tribes over the last, few decades here that we've been doing. So, yep, we have a similar. It's kind of funny with tribal governments, and that we can have, and tribes in general, we have multiple roles, right? Sometimes we're economic development agencies, and so we're like industry, as well as sometimes that we're, providing service to our members, and we're doing those governmental things. But I think that climate change, particularly on the NWL work group, I think that those different roles that tribes can play, I think they kind of come together on these issues. My primary focus as a director for natural resources, of course, is to promote and protect our access to treaty rights, treaty resources. And so this work group is very near and dear to my heart, the NWL stuff. Of course, recognizing there are a lot of co-benefits that come along with having healthy forests, as well as a healthy perspective towards our agricultural industries. I know food sovereignty is an issue that is gaining a lot of traction in Indian country right now with a number of tribes. And it's a little bit outside of my bailiwick, so I won't speak to that. But I know that is a level of interest that is also out there. So yes, I'm glad to be part of this and look forward to continuing to work on that. And I just would close it off with saying that, tribes, we are resilient and adaptable. And those are words that often come up in terms of climate change. And we have been around, and we are happy to share our perspective from going through the number of adaptations that we have faced over the course of our history. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank. Really appreciate that. Let me turn now to Phil.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yep, fine.
Really appreciate being able to follow the last 3 speakers, because I think what I had on my mind is, I think it complements that, or I'll let you be the judge of that. And first, thanks to Scott and Lauren. I've had a chance to dip in on this work group a little bit and really appreciate the work and the thoughtful presentations today. I think what's really a big takeaway for me is just how important and actually exciting the potential of NWL is to help us get to zero net carbon and beyond. I think the pathways are relatively clear, or as clear as they would be at this point. I'm kind of thinking ahead to implementation, and maybe I shouldn't be doing those, but how can we implementation against those pathways at scale? And what it raises for me is a challenge and also an opportunity to engage with some audiences or stakeholders we don't generally think of as necessarily being on the forefront of decarbonization. And I think I'm talking about farmers, and also for forests, I'm talking about individual landowners. Of course, and Director Eichinger talked about the obvious, very important government role in public lands, but I think there was a chart in there somewhere that just spoke to the importance of private landowners and how much of the sequestration opportunity is there. And I think if we look forward, it looks like this is going to mean, if we say this in plain language, paying farmers and private landholders for providing sequestration and emission mitigation services. And that seems like that could be something that could be really attractive to them if it's framed and designed in the right way. I think it was Haley gave some magnitudes of what that might look like, and I think those were national numbers. I hope so. They were significant, but they seem appropriate in the scheme of things, especially if you think about for farmers what's already in the system of farm support payments and such. Getting the funding, the right funding, and getting it in place with the right incentive structure, obviously going to be really critical. Seems like there's a bunch of jurisdictional questions to sort through there, like where's it coming from, and what's state, what's federal, and then the system of measurement that Haley was talking about. But to get to the kind of public support and support from those stakeholders who are going to be really critical to this, I think that's really a big area of emphasis, maybe for us to think through, at least to some degree, at the recommendation phase, even if it's more implementation. And it just sort of goes to a different way of engaging farmers and landowners and in a way that speaks to their values as stewards of the land and resilient problem solvers and all of that. And I think that's just really important. I think there's also a really important opportunity to bring the tribal nations into the mix, improve quality of life in urban areas. There's a big environmental justice element of this as well. I guess in short, I'm just seeing the engagement challenge and opportunity here that we don't probably get to scale impact without that. And it's probably time, even if we're not in implementation, to be thinking about that. And just one small coda, putting my environmental advocate hat on, I'd like to understand a little bit more about the role of wetlands, rivers, lakes in sequestration and in making all the rest of the effort worthwhile. Make sure that's not just an intersectional issue, but it's one where we understand its critical role in this piece and probably in some of the other work group areas. Thanks for the chance to comment.
Well, my ears perked up at the wetlands comment too, Phil, and I think we might have lost Doug. So I'm going to take over in the meantime. I think you correctly point out a lot of the intersectionality, and I think that is the help of seeing all of this through all of your comments. I saw that Marnice put something in the chat, and Pack had his hand up. We'll go Pack first and then to Marnice.
Yeah, this is a fantastic session. I really want to thank the speakers and commenters so far. I'm a climate scientist, as some of you know. I recently just published a paper on this topic. And it was a short opinion piece in the journal Science. And if you want me to send it around, I could. Just ask me. But I teamed up with a guy who, David Brashears, who's literally the world's expert on forest mortality, tree death. And I'm currently out west right now, getting a break from my one and only chair for the last 18 months. But what's going on out west is a great harbinger of what I think is going to be a global problem. And I'm pretty sure of this. I studied hydroclimate and drought. And I think some of the problems we're seeing out west are going to be spreading, aridification. You see it in Michigan right now. The warmer temperatures are drying out things more than we normally get in the summer. And what this means is that what Haley was mentioning is that we really are going to have to figure out how to manage these forests for change and manage them for services. Here we are talking about carbon, but we're also, we've had comment rightfully from DNR about the forest resources, the timber. But there are other things. There's hunting, there's fishing, there's water quantity and quality. There's recreation. There are a lot of things that we have to learn to balance out with carbon. And in our short paper that we published, we made the case that in all likelihood, we plant billions of trees, and people are calling for that around the world. Many of those trees are going to die. And moreover, a lot of the trees that are in natural systems now are dying and burning. And fortunately in Michigan, we're not at that point in a bad way yet, but anyone in the North Woods knows that we have a lot of species dying more from disease and but what I'm getting at is that we need, and I love Bill's comment, we need to create a new, I'm only talking about the forest, but the same thing like he was saying for the farmers. you need to create a new rural industry across our country, managing forests for the ecosystem services they provide, and in particular for carbon. That's my comment. And my question for Haley is that one other thing that we are advocating in our little paper is that we can augment the soil in forests with biochar, meaning we can thin out forests to make them more resilient in the face of forest fire. We can thin them out because right now a lot of the very small diameter materials don't have a market. You could use them for wood pellets and other timber products, but we can make biochar and augment the soil. And why would you want to do that? Well, you create a greater sequestration of soil, but you also make the soil more amenable to climate change by increasing its nutrient characteristics and also its water holding capacity. So I just hope these things are being taken into account. They're not my ideas. We're just trying to amplify them in our little paper. Because if we don't do this, the idea of planting trees or using forest for sequestration is going to be quite frustrating because we're going to see a lot of these forests and trees dead by 2050 because of climate change.
Thanks, Peck, and good to be back with you. I thought it was a hazing thing. You kicked the Illinois guy out of the meeting. So, Phil, it wasn't anything personal, I assure you. So, Marnise, you had put something in the chat. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go to Dr. Meadows. Marnise? Well, I'll tell you what, let's go to Dr. Meadows and then we can come back to Marnise then.
Okay.
Dr. Meadows?
Yeah, Marnise may be on hold. Thank you for the presentations, and I'm just I don't know, overwhelmed a little bit with the conversation, only because I'm a practitioner, I'm a health practitioner, and so I zero in clearly on the health implications. And we've heard presentations about direct air capture, and now, the work of greening our world as a way to get to better health. And I was just curious if there's been any studies or ways of understanding sort of the net health benefits of these approaches and relative to cost, because I don't have a sense of what any of these things cost to do. They all sound doable to me from where I sit. But I also question, land is economy, and the private landowners are owning that land for a reason. And just so from the economic perspective of this, where land is key in money, and the health perspective of it, what in fact does this mean? And is there any technology that is much more beneficial right now, early on, not long term, that would have the biggest impact on the health of Michiganders?
Great, thank you. And I don't know if either of our speakers wanted to comment on that. See Haley nodding her head, so maybe Haley, did you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I'll try to give a partial answer. I don't think I can definitively answer your question, although I wish that I could. But I think if we're looking across the scope of carbon removal options, just in terms of immediate human health, like you're asking, planting trees in urban areas is really, really important because trees are going to help cool cities. So as our climate gets hotter, that's going to help with folks who are really struggling with heat. There have also been studies that have shown that urban trees can help to reduce pollution. It helps reduce noise. So that's probably our biggest bang for your buck in terms of short-term health and the overlap of carbon removal there. And, just on the cost note, you're right. The cost can look pretty astronomical when you see the level of investment that's going to be needed to scale a lot of this stuff up. But there's also the thought of, what's the cost going to be of waiting to act and of not doing these things. So that's just something to put in perspective. And there's a lot of ways to finance these things. We looked particularly at government spending, but there are a lot of ways to leverage private sector investment as well. So maybe that's a partial answer to your question.
Great. Thanks, Haley. Dr. Meadows, do you want to, you're on mute if you're talking.
I'm sorry, Haley. Thank you for trying to capture some of that. I just think that overall, if there's a way that we can capture sort of the health benefits early on and then show that in a way that's meaningful, I know that would bring a lot of folks on board who are still sort of standing on the fence. But the one question, and I may not be wording it correctly, but I'm only thinking about it now with my philanthropic hat, that, land is wealth, especially in philanthropy. And there are a lot of conversations right now going on about how do we bring some level of equity to and in the form of wealth, and land keeps coming up at the center of that. And so if you think about land as a resource for economic development, I guess I keep wondering how realistic is it that those private landowners for one, and then folks who are hoping to acquire more land for economic purposes, is there a disconnect between trying to build a more climate-friendly environment when folks are really struggling to own land for economic reasons? I know maybe it's a reflective question. I'm not sure I'm expecting the answer, but it's one that I keep pondering because, it's like I said, it sounds right, easy, plant trees, get the private sector, the private landowners involved, and those who want to own land. But there seems like there's a midpoint there in terms of people's willingness because of economic reasons that how do we tap that?
Yeah, maybe just a brief response to that is, well, I think hopefully planting trees, the idea is that it wouldn't increase property value. I think we haven't done enough analyses to see whether there's a correlation there, but maybe to come at it from a slightly different angle, I think one of the big things we're working on is ways to make tree planting more affordable and accessible to people who do own land already. So that's one thing, and I think one of the things we're looking at is looking at NRCS, the programs, cost share programs to help landowners afford these kinds of tree planting operations, and look at ways to make those more accessible, because there are a lot of barriers that people have to jump over to access that funding. So again, I don't know if I totally answered your question, but I think that's a really, really great point of land and wealth.
If folks don't mind, I'd like to just briefly jump in and touch on the agriculture side of that, those sets of questions. I think there are also good opportunities for synergistic links as well if it's done right. I think the low-hanging fruit, the baseline approach is work with the producers who we have on the ground, work at big scale, and keep costs low as far as reducing carbon emissions. And if we just had that one lens on it, that would make sense. And we do need to do those things and work with our existing producer base. But I also think there's an opportunity to meet multiple needs at the same time by providing access to land for people who do want to grow healthy, nutritious food for their communities in a way that is carbon beneficial. And that's absolutely doable. We know how to do that. You're right that there are major economic and access barriers to making that happen. But I think if we're thinking about our future, we don't just want a future with a more stable climate. We want a future with more social justice and more opportunities in economic development. And so we should be looking at that holistically and have targeted programs that are designed to move us in that direction under the carbon umbrella, but also under the umbrella of other really important priorities. So yes, I do think that's a direction that we need to go in. Good question.
Thanks, Mitch. Marnice, are you back with us? Did you want to raise the question that you were looking, that you're providing information in the chat for? And if not, I've got a queue and we're going to have to move fairly quickly so I can get back to Director Clark in about 6 minutes here. So I saw Jim Harrison's hand up. Jim, did you have a question?
So actually this is kind of stacking on, so I will be quick. So since we only have 6 minutes, it's kind of stacking on some of the things that have been said. First of all, I think this has been a fantastic meeting, you know, and you can see with the dialogue that's been going on here. I really like the idea that these two presentations have been put together because there's a lot of co-benefits in approaching both agricultural ways of mitigation and improving agricultural practices and forestry itself, and thinking about those holistically, I think is really, really smart. Also, on the urban reforestation issue, I don't know if folks have seen this, but that was actually an article today in Energy and Environment that came out about the benefits of reforestation in urban areas. Detroit was highlighted as one of those cities that have been trying to address this issue. And I don't think, even though it may be a small portion of the overall emissions reductions, there are tremendous amount of co-benefits in relation to doing that, including lifestyle improvement issues that I think could not be underestimated. And then lastly, I would say that in relation to this idea about how we manage forests, I think there's also an overlay in relation to what kind of jobs are created in that, and how that can actually be an economic driver in Michigan, particularly with the large state-owned property that we have that is forest in Michigan as well, like the Climate Corps, right? That the Biden-Harris administration is looking at. And then lastly, I lied. One last thing, I do think that there may be an opportunity to look at best practices, maybe in areas that, over in the EU, that are landlocked in relation to incentives to restore for private landowners, in relation to what kind of incentives work and what don't work, and where we might be able to apply that. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jim. Let me go to Mary Draves and then to Director Eichinger. Mary?
Yeah, hi, Doug, thanks very much. And I appreciate the two presentations. I had an opportunity to review them in advance, and I think both really good foundational and definitely good grounding for all of us. You know, one of the things, and I've had the opportunity to work with the Nature Conservancy in Michigan over several years, and as we look at that, I think natural land management, I think, is one of the tools in the toolbox. And Michigan, I think, is uniquely positioned, especially with groups like TNC out there who know how to do this, right? They know how to do this and help manage. I'm hoping that as we look at recommendations, and as we're saying, okay, this could be a very positive recommendation for us to do that already has well developed, and I would say practices that we can implement maybe faster than others. And I think, Dr. Meadows, to your point, and others, and Marnice in the chat, innovations that we're going to need are going to come slower. These are opportunities that maybe we could implement more rapidly. May not be the big impact that we need to see right away, but I think these are things that we need to say, okay, which are the quick wins? And I think we've got some definite opportunity for quick wins here. Thank you, Doug.
Great, thanks, Mary. And I would raise a good point about lots of good conversation going on in the chat. So I would recommend people take a look at that. Obviously, we can't get to everybody, but there's a lot of good thoughts and a lot of good questions being raised there as well. Director?
Thanks, Doug. Just one kind of comment to sort of play on something that Phil made a comment that I don't want to have lost in this, and that's the importance of the private land. The private land forest landowner. The whole component of active forest management in the state of Michigan, on our state forest lands are very actively managed. So we manage for harvest and regeneration. And the non-industrial kind of family forest land owner, who typifies the majority of the forest land owner, not just in the state of Michigan, but across the Midwest, do not manage forests for that purpose. They are very passively managed forests. And so one of the things that I think we're going to need, one of the nuts that we're going to need to crack in that kind of collective action problem of how do you get, hundreds of thousands of individual landowners to sort of align around sort of these benefits and services that their forest land provide to all of us, is that that component of carbon sequestration potential at different age classes and age structure of forest complexes. Terminal mature forest systems, to some extent, there's sort of diminishing return there. And so how do we have to align what our harvest management approaches are with the potential to capture and sequester carbon, which is a really tough thing to ask someone to do who has a beautiful mature stand of oak. All right, let's go and clear cut that because we're going to regenerate it with aspen, and aspen are really good at chewing up carbon for the next 30 to 40 years. There are some of those kinds of, we're going to have to sort of diffuse that mental bomb that folks have in their minds about what active forest management looks like, and it's really hard to do with those non-industrial private kind of, call them kind of like family forest landowners. And I think that's a really important problem when we think about incentivizing those solutions, as you talked about, Phil. Really important to do that as well. We've got to build some way that we are positively compensating folks for providing, owning land and managing land that provide, these kinds of spin-off services to the rest of us. So it's a really, really important. I just want to make sure I kind of double underline that point because it's a really critical problem for us to solve when we think about the sort of the forest land interface with our climate goals.
Appreciate that, Director Eckinger. Thanks very much. Director Clark, turn it back to you.
Wonderful. This was a great discussion, and I'm so grateful for everybody participating. I'm super grateful to our wonderful presenters. So thank you for what you laid out for us and the clarity with which you did it. I continue to be appreciative also of our co-chairs for the working groups. So I'm going to ask that we throw the slides up. We've got a couple of slides to talk through about process to try to set the table for the next few months. So while we're putting those up, I wanted to just recap a couple of the things I said up front. The first is what we'd like to do for the July meeting is make it a 2-hour meeting so that we've got a little bit more time for those conversations. So just wanted to remind folks that we're going to do that we'll do it from 3 to 5. So add a half an hour at the end. And then the next meeting, I also wanted to remind you, we're going to focus in on energy intensive industries. So obviously a very important part of Michigan's economy and a critical component of what we need to do with decarbonization and going forward. So just that's the next topic. And I also, have found, I suspect you have too, that as we've moved through the timeline, our work groups have been able to inform this process just because of the fact that we've been working in parallel. So it wasn't linear, but that's just the world that we live in because we're, of course, trying to do things quite quickly, which we appreciate all of you being part of. So I wanted to share a couple of things on the work groups. So this first slide is just a reminder of the work group categories and give you a feel for the meetings. I know that our council members have been participating here and there in some of the work groups. And I know your teams have been involved too, but just wanted to recap for everybody how much activity is happening with these work groups. Again, very grateful to the co-chairs. And I saw a bunch of the co-chairs on the meeting chat here participating with us today. So wanted you all to know what's been going on there. So one of the ways that we've worked to build consistency between the work groups is to create a set of questions that the work groups are discussing. So just threw this up here. You all can take a look at them, and this will also be available to everyone after the discussion here today. But this is what we've done to set the table with the work groups as they've been thinking through what are their recommendations. So again, just an effort to have some consistency, and I won't read all of these to all of you, but you can take a look at them. We've also outlined different phases for the work groups to be working through, and they're generally in phase 2 right now. So phase 1 is obviously level setting and making sure that work group chairs and participants have their arms wrapped around the universe that's in front of them. Phase 2, more of the deliberative work and decision-making meetings. So answering those questions and working through, starting through on recommendations. And then phase 3 being reviewing and refining those recommendations. So also to support this, the teams have been working on a template for recommendations, and that template is going to the co-chairs for comments. It will also be going to the council members as well, so that you would love your feedback, and then also you can understand how we're framing the feedback to come from the work group members to feedback into this process. So the template is a component of the questions that you saw earlier, and then again, trying to shape consistency from those recommendations that come out of the work group. So the next session, well, we'll talk about energy intensive industries, then we'll move into a phase where we're considering the recommendations that we see from the work groups. So that's what you can expect for the council meetings going forward. So between here and July, and probably spilling a little bit past the next council meeting, we from Eagle will be reaching out to council members to have some kind of smaller conversations, sidebars about our path forward and about recommendations. So council members should know, some of you are already aware just because we've talked about it in passing, that you'll be receiving that outreach from our team, and we'll work to schedule those for the month of July. So I wanted to mention that too. Phew, so lots of content, I'm feeling really great about our progress and our moving forward. So just wanted to kind of ground all of us and where the work groups are at and make sure you are aware of the progress that's happening there. So before I just go into closing, I'm just going to pause there. I didn't see any hands up, but just see if there's any questions, comments, concerns. As my son's 8th grade teacher would say, questions, comments, concerns, insults. We can hold the insults for today, though, if you don't mind. Okay, folks are looking like we're all moving together, which I appreciate. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody that materials are available at michigan.gov/climate. We also post recordings of the meetings. We post our meeting minutes after they have been approved by the council. So the meeting minutes from today will be posted after they were, or the meeting minutes for May, wait, what month is this? June. The May meeting minutes will be posted after you approve them today. And our next meeting is July 27th. For those of you that are non-council members participating, we also love to take your comments. Eagle-climatesolutions@michigan.gov. Oh, it's on the screen. I didn't have to read it off my second screen. So thanks. We might be done 4 minutes early. Well done. Well done, team. So thanks again to our presenters as well as to council members and work group folks. Very appreciative of your time. Have a great afternoon.
You do it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.